to The Mixtape with Scott, a podcast that weaves together personal stories of economists and an oral history of the last 50 years of economics. I'm your host, Scott Cunningham. And through these conversations, we're building an emerging image of the diverse fields, eras, departments, and individuals who have helped shape this discipline. In this episode, I had the pleasure of speaking with a friend of mine, Joseph Price, professor of economics at Brigham Young University. Our conversation was filled with insights about family, both Joseph's own family and the broader concept that he calls the human family. This focus on family has inspired much of his research, even going back to his job market paper at Cornell, including his latest work in which he links together census records using machine learning to create a giant genealogy of what he calls the human family. Joseph's passion for his research and the thoughtfulness with which he approaches his work made this episode a joy to do and a joy to listen to him. So don't forget to like, share, and follow the podcast, The Mixtape with Scott, for more fascinating stories from the world of economists. Great. Well, it is a pleasure to have on the podcast this week a guy I've known, one of my first people I ever met when I got a real job, Joseph Price. Joe, thanks for being on the podcast.
Well, thanks, Scott.
Could you introduce, for those that are listening, could you tell us your name, your job title, and the organization that writes your paycheck?
Yeah, sure. I'm Joe Price. I'm a professor of economics at Brigham Young University.
Brigham Young. How long have you been there?
There 16, 17 years.
17 years, 16 or 17. That sounds like me at Baylor. So, okay, I have an icebreaker to kind of get us started. If you could have dinner with any three people from history, who would they be and why?
Oh, wow. I mean, for me personally, I'd love to have dinner with Jesus. And then within economics, I don't know, I'm just really interested in some of Adam Smith would be up there. I'm just kind of curious about him as a person. And then honestly, I'd love to have dinner with Alan Kruger, to be honest. And so,
yeah. If you have a dinner with Adam Smith, Jesus, and Alan Kruger, and you don't invite me to it, I'm gonna remember that. I'm gonna make a note of that. You're not invited to my famous people dinner. Okay. All right. That's great. So, all right. Well, why don't we get started? So why don't you tell us where did you grow up and what was your childhood like?
I was born in Utah just while my dad was going to college, but I grew up in Oregon. Just had a really awesome upbringing. I lived in a neighborhood that had a big field in the backyard, and we played football and baseball all the time. And I had a teacher that taught me to love math pretty early on, just let me kind of flourish in that area. I'm really grateful for that. And then just in high school, I really enjoyed, taking classes and doing sports and having friends. And I don't know, just like kind of a good place to be creative and just try out a lot of things.
Yeah. What sports did you play as a kid?
I did, I did everything, but in high school, I did cross country, swimming, and track, and then a little bit of tennis. I played baseball and football and basketball.
So you had this really, so what was it like? What was the teacher situation that they sort of encouraged you with math and it stuck?
Really high in math early on. They didn't know what to do with me. And I just had this math teacher that brought a parent in, and she just taught me one-on-one. And she taught me algebra when I was in 5th grade. And it just blew my mind. And I remember struggling with it because she'd say, like, okay, in this problem, A is equal to 7. And then in a different problem, A would be some other number. And I don't know why my brain had a hard time with that. But once I made that breakthrough, I found math to be just so interesting and expansive.
Wow. So you sort of stuck. So it was a male or a female?
It was a female. It was just a mom of a friend. So Mrs. Pound would come in and help me with math.
Wow. So what kind of high school student did you feel like you became?
I took the honors classes and I love sports. The neat thing is I actually went back and taught math to an advanced group of kids at that same school where I'd had the same experience. And the high school and the elementary were right next to each other. So I just walk over there. I don't know, my high school gave me a lot of freedom. I remember like they just gave me a period off and I'd go and teach math.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You would go teach math in high school to the other school?
I'd walk over to the elementary school, and then I'd had my fifth grade teacher just gave me like 5 kids, and I would just teach math to these 5 kids.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. That they're like, yeah, you're gonna be a professor. You can't turn it off. That must have been a good sign of where you were going. So what do you love about that? What do you like about teaching those kids?
I always wanted to be a teacher. To be honest, I wanted to be an elementary school teacher.
Mm.
And there was just one day my dad's like, "Hey, look, did you know elementary school teachers don't make a lot of money?"
Uh-huh.
And he knew I probably wanted to have a big family, and he just said, life will be a little tough. It'll be tougher if you're an elementary school teacher. So there's part of me that kind of wishes the economics was such that I could have been an elementary school teacher and
Mm.
had the same kind of lifestyle I have as a professor, but that's not the world we live in. So obviously
Yeah.
I love being a teacher. And so
What do you love about being a teacher?
just love it when people discover something new. I love seeing in someone's eyes when they just light up with a new discovery.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Right. Well, so that was my next question. Your early aspirations or dreams before you went to college, was it to be a teacher? Is that what you're telling me before college?
Worked a little bit. I mean, once I realized that I couldn't make money as an elementary school teacher, then I I lived in Intel country, so I grew up in Hillsboro, Oregon. Lots of Intel fabs all around. So at
Oh.
that point, I decided I was going to be a chemical engineer.
Mm.
Yeah, seemed like a pretty safe bet in terms of making money.
Yeah.
I mean, my real dream, I told my mom early on, is I wanted to have an idea factory, and I would just come up with ideas, and then all my workers would like implement my ideas. I think at the time I thought it meant I would be an inventor, but actually the way I do economics today actually looks exactly like the way I described to my mom.
Right. Right. Yeah. You are an idea making machine. That you called that one right. Um, so where do you end up going to college?
I went to Brigham Young University. I actually only applied to 2 schools. I applied to MIT and BYU,
Mm.
and I got to kind of the final rounds at MIT. I remember even interviewing with alumni at MIT and
Wow.
just loving the questions he asked me. Um, I mean, I was disappointed not to get into MIT, but
Mhm.
BYU turned out to be a fantastic place
Mm.
to do
So
college.
you were, I guess, so yeah, that you're now I'm realizing that the math skills that you had were pretty substantial. You really probably were impressive as a high school student.
But within the context of my high school, I think if I'd been at some of the high schools in Palo Alto or other places, it probably would have pushed me even harder. But
Yeah.
within the context
Yeah.
of what my high school offered, it was an amazing experience.
Okay. Okay. Wait, you said Palo Alto. So does that mean you were in
I
California?
was just trying to think of other. I was just trying to think of other places where kids grow up,
Yeah.
where it's not surprising for a kid to take like, or even here in Provo, Utah, like one of our students, Patrick Turley, had like minored in math while he was still in high school, and so
Right.
it just wasn't on the radar at my high school. It wasn't kind of something you thought about doing.
Yeah. 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 It's funny how much random stuff you get on these tracks and there's a lot of randomness to it, just based on what opportunities you have. Well, so you go to Brigham Young. So tell me about when you get there. What's it like?
I did one quarter right before my mission, loved it. And then I came back and I got engaged that first semester after my mission. So I was kind of like a married student as a freshman, sophomore. So I felt
Uh,
like that always kept me pretty grounded.
mhm.
But yeah, I just was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. So I took an accounting class, I took a chemical engineering class, I took an economics class.
Mhm.
Yeah, the economics class with Dr. Curl just blew my brain. Uh, I loved every bit of it. I would call my dad every night and tell him what I was learning. But yeah, that's when I fell in love with economics. Is in that
Why did you take that class? Was it required?
I mean, I liked it. Actually, I had a really good economics teacher in high school. So when I
Oh,
was thinking of what I wanted to do, like chemical engineering was my declared major and
yeah.
it's probably like my default option. But I
Mhm.
was curious about accounting. I'd had friends do that. It seemed like a safe job. And then my high school economics teacher, Rocky Harris, was my favorite teacher ever.
Mhm.
And we traveled to Slovakia together. We built a business together. I mean, he just taught economics in a really cool way. And so
Mm.
at
Y'all
least I
built
had
a
it as part of the choice set. Yeah.
You built a business together as a
Yeah,
high school student?
it was through junior achievement. It's this kind of like economics-y program for high school students, and we sold these little rings that you could press with your hand
Yeah.
that we imported from Slovakia.
What do you mean a ring that you press with your hand? What is that? Is what?
A rubber ring
Yeah.
and you put it in your hand and you squeeze it, and it strengthens your muscles by squeezing it.
Oh yeah, I remember those things.
Yeah, so I'd seen it at REI, and I looked on the back and it said Slovakia. And so we were doing a trip to Slovakia, so I just found out who the manufacturer was, and we just directly imported it and repackaged it ourselves.
Yeah, did you make any money?
No.
Stick to the, yeah. Good economists aren't necessarily good at we're better at a lot of us are better at driving the first order conditions than making money. Okay, so you have this positive experience with this teacher in high school, but you still are saying, but I'm going to do chemistry, but you decide to take this econ class. It wasn't required.
No, I mean, it might have been required, but I basically, the accounting, econ, and chemical engineering was my semester to say, what am I going to major in?
Yeah.
And the craziest thing is at the end of the semester, the chemical engineering department gave me a really small scholarship, like $600 a semester.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I knew I loved economics, but that $600 weighed so heavy on me because I was just young and married and poor that I almost stayed in the chemical engineering major so I could keep my $600.
$600. You're like, the opportunity cost. Yeah, it's like I'm paying to be an econ major. That's how they get you in chemical engineering. They make you pay to leave. That's great. So, but then you have this class. What's this class, and who was that professor?
It was Jim Curl. It was a classroom with 800 people in it.
Wow.
I know, and just every lecture just changed my world. Just made me think about things in a different way. Yeah, he was a master teacher. Just loved every bit of it.
So, what was it? Principles?
It was a principles course, like a micro macro in one class.
You remember which book he used?
He used his own book, actually.
Oh, okay. Was he a
it
long
was just kind of like it was just like a paperback version of his book that we would, it was like a one-off kind of book just for BYU.
Oh.
But,
so
yeah.
What do you remember really like getting impacted by from his class that was different from the high school teacher's class? Like why, what took you off there?
It was a lot more rigorous.
Mm.
And it wasn't like it was very math heavy, but it, like all the things we use in math, it was there. And honestly, it felt to me like engineering, but for society.
Mm-hmm.
How do you structure society so that the good things happen? That to me seemed like an engineering problem.
Mm-hmm.
But it was so relevant. At like every single lecture, I felt like there was something in my life that it informed. And then the last lecture, he gave a last lecture that it absolutely changed me. It was actually about John Rawls, the veil of ignorance, the theory of justice, and it just made sense. And so I actually ended up volunteering at the soup kitchen for a whole year after that lecture. Like literally, that lecture like changed me. And the next day, I went and signed up.
Wait, can you, for the sake of the listener who doesn't know what the veil of ignorance is, can you sort of describe what it was and what it did to you, why it had such a big effect?
His question was really just about what's the appropriate level of redistribution that we should have in the world. And the thought experiment is, imagine before coming to Earth, you didn't know what, if you're going to be born rich or poor, like how much inequality would you want to have in the world? And all of us wrote that down on a piece of paper. And, I think I wrote 4-to-1 or 3-to-1 or some small number. And then he showed us the numbers that actually exist in the world and used this idea of how to be a Rawlsian. And I don't know, it just really connected with me. And it just made me realize I had a lot. And so I felt like maybe I could give a little bit of what I had to people who maybe had less. And so I would do breakfast at a soup kitchen where homeless people would come in. It was just weird that like economics, which is usually viewed as selfish, actually made me a very unselfish person. So I love the ability to combine like engineering with compassion.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, it's this issue of that Rawlsian thought experiment, so I've never seen anybody do that in class. So he asks you to write down what's he saying, what you think inequality is or what you think the tails are?
Put yourself behind the veil of ignorance.
Yeah.
And then write down the rule you would choose.
Like, so what'd you write down?
I wrote down maybe 4-to-1.
4-to-1 means what?
Like the top 5 percentile would be making 4 times as much as the bottom 5 percentile.
I see. And what did he say? I don't know.
It's like 1,000,000 to 1.
Yeah. Slightly.
I mean, even within the US, it's like, he says, look, well, he'd ask us like, what part of the income distribution do you think we're from? And all of us said middle class. And then he said, well, if you think you're from the middle class, then your parents must make this much money. And so,
Right.
and it made us realize that we were all from the upper class. And
Right.
so,
Right. Yeah. So that had a big effect on you. So you start thinking about inequality and redistribution questions. Whereas before that, what were you thinking economics might be? Because you really loved it.
in high school, it's all about like supply and demand, the lemonade stand, investment, those kind of like business decisions.
Right.
Definitely part of economics, but I think what I fell in love with is the fact that economics might relate to child development, or it might relate to education.
How'd you get into that? What brought you into that question?
Well, I had kids. I mean, and I was also working at a high school at the time. I was teaching math at the local high school here. And then they gave me 10 kids to mentor who failing several classes, doing poorly. And I would go do home visits. And so part of my Rawlsian mindset also was like, well, how do we help kids that are at the bottom of the income distribution do better? And it made me start thinking that maybe we have to start even earlier and earlier. Like by the time they're in high school, I just felt like so hard to move the needle. So that got me really interested in early childhood stuff.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The core questions about, overall well-being and redistribution starts making you think about even the use of your time and where you allocated your time. Yeah, I want to talk about that in a minute, because that's one of my favorite papers that you've written. I've told you that. So you have this incredible experience, and that basically takes you out of chemical engineering?
At that point, I'm out of chemical engineering. I still didn't know if economists made money. So I took Econ 380 with Mark Showalter, and he would have us read articles from the Journal of Economic Perspectives. I saw this title of an article that said, economists make a lot of money, just don't tell anyone about it. And so, like, the article, and it was like, it was kind of like a Siegfried and Stock paper that just basically posted salaries for assistant professors, associate professors, and professors.
Yeah.
And it blew my mind, because I had in mind like what a high school teacher makes.
Right.
That was kind of my reference point. And then these numbers were really big.
Right.
And so at that point, I was like, wow, I can love economics, and I can actually like support a family.
Right.
And so then that's when I really decided I wanted to be a professor.
Right. Yeah. So it all kind of started coming together. So then you graduate. Who was there anybody else at Brigham Young that had a big effect on you?
Yeah, probably Lars Lefgren. I mean, by far, Lars Lefgren had the biggest effect on me.
Lars Lefgren?
Yeah, because I took Econ 380 with Mark Showalter, and I really wanted to be his research assistant. Now, keep in mind, I'd only taken 2 econ classes at that point. So, of course, nobody's going to hire you as a research assistant. But I approached him, and Mark said, I don't have any positions at the moment, but there's a brand new person named Lars Lefgren. Maybe he'll give you a shot. So I go and knock on Lars's door, and he hires me and has me do like pretty basic stuff. But I was his research assistant for 2 years, and it gave me so much exposure to research. There's probably maybe 6 or 7 really important papers he worked on at that time, and I got to, be part of the conversations and see the whole process play out. Him and Brian Jacob were doing a lot of work together, and so it's kind of really neat to just be part of that. And
So that's interesting. I mean, did you feel like while you were at Brigham Young, so when I say something like mentor versus teacher, did you feel, if I say the word mentor versus professor?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you tell me how they're similar and how they're different in your life and what you've experienced as a student?
The thing that's crazy is I never took a class from Lars. So he was never my teacher or professor, but he was my mentor. Like, we worked so closely together on so many projects. And the coolest thing is that last summer, right before I was going to grad school, he just set me loose. He's like, hey, here's a project. Let's try this out. It was using basketball data. And even though that project didn't work out, it was because of that project that I was able to write the paper with Justin Wolfers about NBA referees, because I was already working with data as an undergrad. And so I knew how the data worked because of this work with Lars. And so that was a real eye opener. The other thing I loved with Lars is I'd always tell him research ideas. And always listen. And he'd almost always say, oh, someone's already published that. And he said, you should go look at like Sandy Black's paper, which was one of them I remember. And I went and read her paper, and she published it just like 2 years before. And I remember, and he'd always say it like, oh, that's too bad. You came up with an idea that you can't publish because someone's already had it. But for me, in my mind, it was always like, I'm only 2 years behind the frontier.
Yeah. Right.
Like, wow, if I had this idea, just, Sandy beat me by just 2 years. Like,
Right.
granted, I know now that she probably started the project, these things take time, but in my mind, it was like I was 2 years away from the frontier
Yeah.
as an undergrad. And that was just really exciting.
Wow. That was like a birth order paper, or what was it?
No, it was one of her other papers. I think it was like her school discontinuity paper. It was one of her ed papers. Yeah.
I see. Okay. Yeah. So you're getting excited. Even though, so when you think of somebody being your teacher versus somebody being your mentor, how would you explain to somebody that's not in econ, what's the difference between those two?
I think a big part of it is the longevity of it, which is, we have our teacher and then we move on to other classes and they're no longer our teacher. Whereas Lars was my mentor for 2 years. And actually, I was grateful to have him as a mentor and not a teacher. Yeah. Because it's helpful to have an advocate. The hardest thing about the teacher-student relationship is at the end of the day, the teacher has to evaluate you.
Yeah.
And that can be a high-stakes evaluation.
Right.
And so it's hard to be vulnerable in that relationship. Whereas in a mentor relationship, it's a little different because they have a real vested interest in my whole self.
Right.
Not just myself in their class.
Yeah. Right. So you've benefited from Lars being your mentor.
Oh, yeah.
And so you decide how quickly after you graduate are you thinking, I definitely want to become a professional economist? Is it pretty quick?
Oh, right away. I mean, even before I started working with Lars, I knew I wanted to get a PhD in economics. And I knew I wanted to be a professor at BYU.
Oh, you wanted to come back?
And so my whole goal was, that was my goal.
Yeah. It seems like Brigham Young, not to get on a side quest here, but Brigham Young seems like such a special department. It doesn't have a PhD program. It's a religious school, and yet its faculty essentially are constantly publishing extremely high impact papers across a lot of fields. And it's not just a fluke. It's always been that way. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about what the secret has been, or is that just like a plan? Is that planned? I mean, it seems like it has to be planned.
I would say here's a couple parts of the secret that like any place could replicate. We have a really high level of collegiality. Like what I would say is like a real sense of fellowship with each other. I enjoy coming to work. I almost never miss a day of work. Eat lunch together. There's kind of open door policy where I can talk to people. I enjoy. So I guess they've created a place where I really enjoy coming to work and being at work. I think that's part of it. Also, we're very student centered. And so there was a moment when I almost left BYU and I got to meet with the president of the university here at BYU. And that conversation really helped me see that BYU is about creating the next generation of economists. And I think like when that becomes your focus, then it makes being good have a purpose. It's not just that I want to have an awesome CV. It's I want to be good enough that I can actually have the things to offer to the next generation. And so that kind of mission fit focus on students is, I think, another part of why we work so hard.
What do you think that when you say that you sort of have a sense of like mission about producing the next generation of economists versus what? Like, so imagine you had all of those other things you just listed, but that little piece of your vision was not there. What do you think would be different in the department?
Maybe stop doing research earlier in your career. I mean, research is really hard. And I mean, we have like, this is something we just have to all acknowledge, is that we could wake up one morning and be like, why do I work so hard at research? And why do I go through all the rejection that it entails and all of the hard things you have to do? For me personally, I want to stay at the frontier because of what the impact I can have on my students. So that's, but again, it's also partly that mission is like our students become my future colleagues.
Right.
Because we're a religious school, we tend to hire from many of our faculty were BYU alumni.
Yeah.
Uh, I could see that at other places where maybe there's a real connection to the university that you might want to put a lot of effort into your students because they're going to make your future department even
Right.
better.
Right. Right. Yeah. It seems like Brigham Young, if they are going to have, and this is what I was thinking one day, is if Brigham Young is going to have a strong department of any kind, a world-class department of any kind, they have to mentor the students, because as a religious school, there's only certain types of people that you can hire, which would be people that are members of the church.
Yeah.
So it seems like, I mean, you don't have as much flexibility because you can't access a certain kind of non-church amazing professor, right? Yeah. Yeah. So that's fascinating. So there's a lot of selection on the hiring side of just bringing in people that you can tell are like that. How can you tell? I mean, when y'all are on the market and you're hiring, what's the signal of that kind of productivity?
How to tell that early on? I mean, you can ask questions like, how would you involve a student in this type of research? That might be questions. Or what was the most important thing about your experience as an undergrad?
Yeah.
Those might be two questions, but.
So you end up graduating, you go to Cornell. Tell me about what was it like when you got to Cornell? Where did you sort of gravitate? Was there lots of fields that you could have imagined yourself sort of specializing in?
I'm pretty unique in that the reason I went to Cornell is because Ron Ehrenberg showed me love
Yeah.
during the process. So, I mean, I knew my advisor before I even went to school. Like I went to Cornell because Ron Ehrenberg called me up. I still remember where I was standing when he called me. It kind of blew me away that a professor would take time to just talk to me. And he talked to me for like an hour. And at the conversation, I felt so loved that it was like a done deal. And so, yeah, I came to Cornell knowing I wanted to work with him. I thought I was going to be an ed researcher.
Why? Because of the work with Lars?
Like the work with Lars, the work I'd done in the high school.
Yeah.
It's just like I had this, I always found ed topics really interesting. Ron was doing higher ed stuff. But then I guess when I got to grad school, I mean, he was the ideal mentor I could have. I met with him every week as part of a group. There's kind of a team of us working with him. I had that weekly experience throughout my whole time at Cornell. I went to seminars right away my first year. I kept an idea notebook. But then just over time, my interest kind of drifted a little bit from ed. And
so for the sake of the listener, could you tell us who Ron Ehrenberg is?
Yeah, so Ron Ehrenberg's a professor at Cornell. He's a labor economist. He's just done amazing seminal work in tons of areas. So in some sense, kind of my own variety of interests match a bit his career as well. But yeah, but yeah, he's like one of the most kind of loving, kind mentors. And actually, a few years ago, we had an event where all of his mentees came together, and it was just neat to see how many of us already knew each other. He's kind of created kind of his posterity is kind of a well-connected network. And so,
Wow. Yeah, he's I know him by reputation, but I've not met him. So you continued to receive a lot of mentoring from him there.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so when you were in graduate school, what did you sort of gravitate towards for your job market paper?
Well, I had two kids before I came to grad school, and I had two kids while I was there. And I think I remember one day when a professor found out that I had four kids.
Yeah.
Maybe I had three at the time. Let's just say I had three at the time. And they found out I had three kids. They said, haven't you read Gary Becker's quantity quality trade-off paper? I had not. I probably should have, but I went and read it, and it got me thinking. And I was trying to think about how do parents allocate resources to their children, and this kind of analogy of a pie where we split the pie. It didn't seem to match with like how I allocated time to my kids.
Mm,
Because I tend, like when I read to my kids, it's not like I like read to one kid and then another kid and then another kid. I wasn't actually splitting my time. I was actually reading to all three of them at the same time. Or when
ah,
we ate dinner together, we were all around the table. A lot of when we'd go on hikes or talk, there was more than one kid present.
yeah.
And so it just got me thinking about, what does that even mean? Like what does it mean to split a pie when actually they're all eating the same piece of the pie?
Yeah, it's not, it's like non-rival. It's like a
Yeah,
public good a little bit.
yeah.
So
So
wait, so
that's
what do you go ahead? Sorry.
no, that's just what got me thinking about it. And so then I was just curious. And I noticed that since I had three kids, it was actually kind of funner to be a dad than if I had one kid.
Mm,
I found it a little more dynamic. I probably spent more time as a father just because I don't know, I'd be like studying and then one of my kids would say, like, Dad, can you come play with us? And so I don't know, I felt like my pie was bigger because there was three of them.
mm.
But I don't know. And so it just got me curious about, how do parents spend time with kids? And then right at that time, the American Time Use Survey came out and
Oh,
provided a really way to look
that
at
was your job market paper?
it. Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
literally
So yeah,
for the sake of the reader. I didn't realize that was Joe's job market paper. This paper I want to hear him talk about is one of my favorite papers. And I think if you go to the Journal of Human Resources, it's oftentimes listed on the site as like one of the most downloaded papers they've ever had. Can you tell us just sort of the elevator pitch about that paper?
yeah, I was just curious how parents spend time with their kids. And I discovered two interesting facts. One is they tend to spend the same amount of time with all their kids on any given day. Uh, but as kids get older, they spend less time with their parents. So those are the two facts. And if you combine those two facts, what it means is instead of comparing kids at the same point in time by birth order, if you compare them at the same age, you get huge gaps in how much time they spend with their parents.
Okay, so give me an example. How big's
Yeah,
huge?
so like when my firstborn was 6, so maybe when I had a 6, a 4, and a 2 year old,
Mhm.
I was reading to them like crazy, like maybe 45 minutes every day.
Of the two, of like the oldest.
Well, no, I'd read to all of them. I'd be like reading out loud from, like a Lewis Sacker book, like Holes, and the kids would all be there. But then as my kids got older, I've actually found that we do other things with our time. So sadly, as kids get older, we spend more time watching television together.
Yeah.
We spend more time driving together. And so if you then compare just reading time across your kids at the same age,
Yeah.
you'll see big drop-offs in that activity. And it's true across almost all of the human capital creation things that parents do to create human capital.
So why is this important? This is the issue. It's like this, you're looking at time and a person could be like, this is just about time use, but you've got this like larger question about inequality and these kinds of things. Why is this an economic question?
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing is at the same time, Sandy Black had written this really great paper showing large birth order differences
Uh-huh.
in educational attainment. And there was just this kind of puzzle, like what is it about birth order? And her paper was neat because it was saying it wasn't about family size, it was about birth order.
Mm-hmm.
That the firstborn actually does just as well if there's one kid, two kids, three kids, four kids.
Mm.
That seemed to match, like that result seemed to match with the way I kind of viewed the world.
Mm-hmm.
But then I started looking at my kids and I was like, holy cow, I was starting to see the disparities within my own children.
Mm.
But what it made it an interesting economic question is I was following an equity heuristic
Right.
to be fair with my kids, but I was only being fair each day.
Yeah.
And then from an intertemporal perspective, I was being very unfair. In fact,
Because
my
you're,
oldest kid was getting like 2,000 extra hours.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Did you ever do that kind of calculation about the amount of hours of solitary hours?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't do it for my own kids, but in the ADIS data, it came out to about 2,000 hours difference if the first and second born are about 3 years apart.
2,000 additional hours
Yeah, and this
of,
isn't even the alone time. This is like during the years where you have both kids present in the home. The firstborn gets 2,000 extra hours. It's actually like having a full-time parent for an entire year of
wow.
difference. Yeah.
Wow. So did you link it? So the motive, am I right that the motivation for it is like this empirical regularity that the firstborn child tends to do better on like economic dimensions?
Yeah, so I was kind of taking that as given from
Right.
Sandy's work. And Kel and Paul, and so I was then just saying, okay, we know this. Why is it true? And I was just really curious about how parents allocate. time.
It was like you were trying to see if the evidence might be the mechanism might be the time use.
Yeah, exactly.
Had anybody offered up that suggestion theoretically?
I mean, Joe Hutz had a great paper about like you're really tough on the first kid as a signal to the other kids. That was like one of the models. I don't know. There was a lot of, I read like all the birth order books at the time, like Dalton Conley's book and others. I don't know. I can't remember like the lens through which I'm sure people, I'm sure people had talked about it. I think it was just the ATIS made it possible.
You needed the American Time Use Survey.
You needed the American Time Use Survey to do it.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think so it's like, I think to an economist, you hear that this economist anyway, it's like, I hear that and I go, oh, well, then what you need to do is you need to allocate time such that the net marginal benefits are equal across every child. So then you like never spend any time with your firstborn. You're like, you're on your own. I gotta go read with this kid and get him caught up. But what do you think is the policy implications as you sort of learned about it?
Well, I mean, what you see, here's the two biggest, like, let's put human capital in one bucket and let's put television in the other bucket. That, like, if all you did was just ask yourself the question, like, would I have done this activity when my oldest was this age?
Right.
I think we would probably watch a lot less television with our kids.
Yeah.
And probably spend a lot more time reading and talking and playing together.
Right. It's funny. In many ways, that paper is I'm gonna say just because I'm trying to think of the right word, but in many ways, that paper is just purely a descriptive paper.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
It's not like the kind of the world we live in now where everything's got to kind of be a diff and diff or something like that. It's just like, so, I mean, what was it like on the market in like, it was like 06 or 07?
Yeah.
So like, 07. what was sort of the response by the market about, I mean, it's such an interesting discovery about a possible mechanism, but it didn't have any kind of, you don't ultimately randomize time.
Right. It would never fly as a job market paper today. You nailed it perfectly. It's a descriptive paper. And that's why when people are derisive of descriptive papers, I'm like, my job market paper is a descriptive.
You're like, I have the best descriptive paper at the JHR.
I mean, even at my job talk at BYU, there was people that probably like didn't think of the paper that highly because it was, not very technical. Highlight. There wasn't an identification strategy. It was very descriptive.
What do you think what do you think for a paper like that compared to, because you've done all these causal studies too. So, for a paper like that, job market paper, what's the unique piece of human capital that a person needs to have for a study like that might not be the same human capital for doing like diff and diff or something like that?
Yeah, I guess there's two things I had going for me is I thought more about parent time allocation than probably anyone had ever done in human history. I mean, it was what I thought about all the time. And so it was just thinking through that just hard and deep and trying to relate it to other literatures.
Right.
And another is I knew the ATIS really well. Like,
why'd you know it so well?
Again, you're going to learn, like poor Joe gets driven by money a little bit. There was an early ATIS conference that included kind of like a small prize. So they would pay for your trip to DC to present, and then I think there was like maybe like a $500 or $1,000 little.
So much of your life story is chasing $100 here and $100 there, and they always work out.
I was a young parent. I got my PhD done in 4 years, and people are like, "That's crazy. Why'd you do that?" And I was like, I could get my salary a little.
You're like, yeah, I heard somebody's paying money for for graduates. That's great. Yeah. So in some ways, but so this is what I'm going to ask you. It's like, and I'm not wanting to put you on the spot, but it's funny that you said that what the human capital that allowed you to do that descriptive paper, you said, I'd been thinking about it a lot. Well, you could imagine somebody doing, I've been thinking about it a lot for any kind of causal study, but it's interesting that you kind of say like that's kind of like prized almost. Can you tell me more about why you said that? Why would that be such a special skill?
Well, it's just, I mean, what I discovered was something that was sitting in front of us the whole time, and no one had ever seen it.
Right.
And the insight was that the equity heuristic day to day actually creates massive amounts of inequity over time.
Right.
And it was just sitting there in the data, but unless you were thinking about time allocation in an intertemporal way and thinking about what it looks like day to day and what does it look like over time, like it had been overlooked. And so that's what I meant is I thought about it so much, and I thought about it from so many different directions, and I was like watching it play out in my home, that I knew that one little narrow topic really well.
Yeah.
And then I was just working with one data set, and I knew that data set really, really well. And then I was lucky to be one of the first adopters of a new
of the E2S. Right. Right. Yeah. You know, I mean, I think that something I try to, tell people is, I mean, the thing about a causal study is there's a particular kind of rush that you get from a causal study. You sort of do feel, especially outside. Well, I mean, I've never done an RCT, but there's always this feeling of like, well, here's something that nobody knew, maybe, or maybe they did, or now, but they don't, but now they know it a little better. It's like, but is there an equivalent of that in a descriptive study like you did in your JHR?
It's usually a really cool figure.
It's a really cool figure.
Yeah. So my JHR, there is one figure, and I mean, it doesn't look cool, but that figure captures the essence of what I discovered. Every semester when I teach a class, I always show that figure to my students. And I just say, this picture is what allowed me to get my PhD.
Right.
And we joke about the fact that it's a very simple picture, but until you think about the picture the right way, you would not have caught the key insight.
Which is like the birth order and the amount of average time. Yeah.
So it's like a very simple figure, but I remember the day I calculated that figure just in the data.
Yeah.
And then I just drew it out by hand.
Yeah.
It was when that epiphany, it's kind of like the flash of genius, is that moment when you see it for the first time.
I mean,
which obviously a well-identified study.
You had to have sent this to Gary Becker, and he had to have loved it.
I regret not doing that. I got to meet him once. Yeah, I was sitting on the front row when he gave a talk, and I think I was just intimidated. I mean, I just don't think I had the chutzpah to do that.
But it's like such a Becker paper. It's like quality, quantity, education, time use.
Should have. Yeah, I should.
I mean, it's just like he would have looked at it probably, and he would have been like, "Yep, this is 100% what's going on, and I need you to come take a job at Chicago." Okay. I'll call somebody. Okay, so I want to talk about this new work you've been doing on these genealogy databases. What is this about? What is this about? Kind of give me, for the sake of the listener, what have you been working on all these years, and how are you going about it?
Yeah, so I think what was unique is I discovered family history as a hobby. I would spend maybe 10 or 15 hours a week doing family history research, either for myself or helping other people. I just really enjoyed it. I loved it. And then I was at an MDR conference and bumped into Martha Bailey. And I asked her what she was working on. And she said she was linking together all these records in Ohio. And this little light went on in my head that what she was doing felt a lot like family history for the mass, like family history, but in a very automated way. I just from that moment on, I was just like, I want in. I want to do
automating. So you were by hand in some library, kind of going through a bunch of books. And what is Martha doing?
Well, no, I was still using indexed records. I was attaching sources one by one, but Martha was using machine learning to actually match together millions of people all at once. And so that seemed pretty awesome. But then I was it got me thinking about, well, where does the training data come from? How do we know if it's a match? Because I've been doing this really careful research. And so I was just wondering, can we somehow take the careful research, combine it with the automated approaches, and maybe do even more?
So give me an example. So what does training mean for the sake of the students that are listening? What are you doing?
So imagine I go to your grandpa's page on Family Search.
Yeah.
And I notice that he's attached to the 1940 census and the 1930 census. That attachment maybe was done by someone doing careful research. Now I know that person in 1940 is the same as this person in 1930. And I can give that to the machine and say, this is a true match.
Yeah.
And then the machine can look at the characteristics of the two people and try to learn how to tell if two people are the same person.
You know why? So you're interested in, I mean, clearly you're interested in family. It goes deep inside your bones. But
Yeah.
but what are you hoping to do with a bunch of links? What are you and where what are you doing that Martha's not doing?
Well, I mean, she kind of, granted, and it's not just Martha, it's Rana Bermitsky and Leah Bustan and James Feigenbaum. It's like this kind of, and Jonas Helgertz and Steve Ruggles. I mean, it's this revolution in terms of linking records together.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think a little bigger. Like, what would it look like if we linked together the entire human family in one big interconnected network? And recognizing that, we have uses for that data as economists.
Yeah.
But the world has other uses for that data.
And
so if we can find a way to partner the world with the economists, and do our little part, but in conjunction with this massive world effort to do the same thing, then I think both groups win.
So like, what do you do? Like, so give me an example, like what, just so the scale of this, help me understand, what is your long-term ambition in the long run? If you were successful, what will you have created?
It would be a family tree, a tree for the human family that would have a profile for each unique person that ever lived. And then that unique profile would be linked to records that we have for that person, census records, military records, death records. And then that person would be linked to each of their one-hop relatives, to their parents, their spouse, siblings, and children. And because of those linkages, we could then follow people over time, and we could follow families over time. And we could follow families as they move across oceans, and we could follow families as they go from rich to poor or poor to rich. Or we can see what happens when there's an economic shock, maybe oil discovery in Oklahoma, or maybe a war or a pandemic.
So you're using, so give me examples of the data sets, the names of the data sets, and like what exactly you're doing.
US Census records. Oh yeah, sorry. So mostly US Census records.
Okay.
So from 1850 US Census up to 1950 Census. And so each row would be a unique person.
Okay.
And then each column would tell you which censuses they're in. And then there'd be other columns telling you who are their parents, who are their siblings, who are their spouse and children. And then with those two pieces, both linking people across time and linking them to their relatives, you could reconstruct lots of things.
How far back do you think is realistically that you can go before the data just gets too spotty?
Probably, I mean, for me, I tend to I go back to 1850 usually, but I'm pretty sure like going back to 1750 will be possible in a lot of places.
It's out there. That data is out there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like a really careful genealogist can easily take their family back to 1750 for many countries. I mean, certainly my family goes back that far. But there's countries and groups for which that's not possible. But, if you're thinking about Western Europe, North America, parts of South America.
I could see how questions about inequality persisting over time, given these basic concepts like annual rates of growth, that you might be able to track out, the growth of a family or something like that. Sure. So what kinds of questions have you worked on so far with it?
So I have, I have the paper with Seth Zimmerman and Val Michelman about students at Harvard.
Yeah.
And how important your social connections are in college.
Yeah.
So that was a really fun paper that kind of combined gathering new data, linking data, following people over long periods of time.
Yeah.
Cool papers about the impact of immigration on local labor markets. Some cool papers about wealth shocks that come through oil discoveries.
Yeah.
Some papers about the impact of prejudice on long-run outcomes for children. Yeah, these are all kind of some stuff on the intergenerational correlation of longevity.
So this is your heart and soul right now. This is how is this like your only thing you're working on, or do you keep a lot of balls in the air?
Yeah. Whenever projects come in, I always evaluate it through, will this advance the gathering of the human family into one large interconnected tree?
Oh, really?
So that is, so like I still get approached about doing sports papers, and I mostly say no to those, which is hard because that was a big part of my early career.
Yeah.
Or people will approach me about behavioral stuff or family stuff. But really right now I look at most projects through the lens of, will this help in this gathering of the human family? That's really where my gift is at the moment.
Oh, that's cool, Joe. That's really cool. So I want to show you a quote real quick. Let me I'm going to show my screen. Okay. And this is let's see, what page am I on? 287. So we'll go back. So this is a paper by William Shockley, and he ran Bell Labs. I think
Yeah.
he was a Nobel Prize winner on the statistics of individual variations of productivity in research labs.
Okay.
But basically, what it is, why do some scientists write a million papers? And so I wanted to show you this right here. And I'm going to highlight it. And I was wondering if you wouldn't mind reading it. For the sake of the reader.
Sure. Yeah, it says, for example, consider the factors that may be involved in publishing a scientific paper. A partial listing, not in order of importance, might be ability to think of a good problem, ability to work on it, ability to recognize a worthwhile result, ability to make a decision as to when to stop and write up the results, ability to write adequately, ability to profit constructively from criticism, determination to submit the paper to a journal, persistence in making changes if necessary as a result of the journal action. Yeah, that's a really cool list.
Okay, keep going. Read one more.
Sorry. To some approximation, the probability that a worker will produce a paper in a given period of time will be the product of a set of factors, F1, F2, related to the personal attributes discussed above. The productivity of the individual would then be given by a formula such as P equals F1 times F2 all the way down to F8. So each of these factors that he just listed.
Okay, so I wanted to get your reaction to something. So the formula for those that are listening is the probability of writing well, it's not even the probability of writing a paper. It would be the probability of publishing it. And it's the product of those 8 things. And I was just wanting you to make a comment here. First comment is, what's your reaction to the fact that it's the product of 8 things and not the sum of 8 things?
Yeah, no, I actually love that a lot, because as you look at this list, you realize these are all places where a project can fail to get published.
Give me an example.
I mean, let me think, like ability to recognize a worthwhile result. Like you can imagine that you think it's what you've discovered is worthwhile, and it's not. And so you could still go through those other steps, but because of that point in the process, it's not going to get published.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or the ability to think of a good problem, like that's gotta be the right from the start. Like every good idea is going to have to start from a good problem that you're working on. And then, like the ability to profit constructively from criticism, I see that as like one of the key things you need to have, is that ability to ask people to comment on your work and the ability to receive that criticism in a way that'll make it a better paper.
I wonder sometimes if early on, if we even are thinking in terms of a production function, if we think of it as additive.
Yeah, possibly. Like if I'm really,
because you sort of think, well, I am really good at coming up with good problems, and I do write adequately, and they don't really realize that being good at 7 is not sufficient. You have to have non-zero values for all 8 of them, or it doesn't produce anything. It's kind of an Anna Karenina principle for writing papers. So I was kind of curious, I think it's kind of interesting that none of those say intelligence. And I wanted to kind of get, you're obviously very smart. And if the listener wants to go look at Joe's incredible productivity, you can. But I wanted to kind of ask you, these seem like skills. They might be called grit, like now, but they seem like skills. And so I was wondering, what is it that you find of those 8? Obviously, you have non-zero values of all those 8. Which one of those has worked really well for you, and where do you struggle, and how have you solved those struggles? Because you've clearly solved them, even if they did exist.
Yeah, I mean, so actually, this is one thing that's helped me a ton in mentoring my students, is that every paper, I look at each of my papers. So take the birth order paper that was in the JHR, which is my job market paper. I can actually think of like 20 people and it's seminal ideas that made that paper work. Curry, Sandy Black, Gordon Dahl, who like, and I can actually remember the moment I was talking to them and asking them. And the cool thing is, obviously we acknowledge them, but I get the credit. So, I mean, I basically, I sit down with Gordon Dahl for 45 minutes and he gives me some amazing ideas and I get to put those into my paper. And so my paper is like the combination of maybe 20 really clever things. And I only had to come up with a couple of them.
Well, what are you saying? What's the skill that you just identified?
The skill is the ability to listen and take notes,
Mm.
and to actually acknowledge that like really good insights can come from almost anyone you interact with.
Because you're just open-minded. You have a natural tendency. You try to be open-minded and curious.
Try to be open-minded. Yeah. Because for me, the paper is separate from me.
Right.
So I'm totally fine. If someone wants to criticize my paper, that's fine, because like my worth as a person comes separate from my papers. I've always like been able to look at them as like as truth, like something we're trying to discover.
Right.
And if someone else can help me make that thing better, I'm okay with that. I mean, it still hurts. It's the hardest thing about our profession, I think, is the thing I'm most need to prepare my students for, is it's a really hard profession. Like there are parts of our profession that actually can really grate on your mental health.
Yeah.
And so keeping my paper separate from who I am as a person has been really helpful.
How do you do that? What practices have allowed you to be able to hold something that's really important to you that you love, but not, quote, it be your identity? What helps you do that?
I think it helps. I don't actually think I'm that great. I mean, I look at other people and I see them as so much better at econometrics than me, or so much better at coming up with an identification strategy. So there's always a part of me, I don't know, I guess some people call it imposter syndrome. I've never thought of it as imposter syndrome. It's more been like an acknowledgement of the fact that I'm who I am. And I've had an amazing life. Like I've been blessed in so many lucky ways along the way and had so many people help me. Mm-hmm. And then I just acknowledge that like I still need that help from other people. Mm-hmm. And it's really cool now that I can see my students as part of that process. I have 60 research assistants, and they're so talented. And I don't have to feel like I have to be better or smarter than them in everything.
Right.
Especially now that I have computer science students and applied math students, they can do things I cannot do. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it, that in that list of 8 things, econometrics does not show up.
Yeah.
I mean, like, it's obviously very, very important, and like doing really well on your prelims is very, very important, and being, working hard is very, to get smarter and smarter is very important. But it's like, if those other 8 things are not there, all 8 of them, it doesn't matter how great you are in these things. You've got to, and so trying to, and it's interesting that you say the ability to profit constructively from criticism, determination to submit the paper to a journal, persistence in making change. It's funny. A lot of these are probably have allegories to just everyday normal struggles, being separated from you're not finding your identity in the stuff that you do. It's very hard when you love the things you do,
Yeah.
But okay, so I want to conclude here. If you could go back in time to that young kid in high school, and you could give him any advice, all right, of anything that you think you now would like that young man to hear, what would you tell him?
Say people are more important than projects. I was a very busy young man, and I was always focused on projects. And I guess what I've discovered in my life is actually it's been the people who have been absolutely critical to my success. So I wish I would have started doing that earlier. Like here's an example. In college, I hardly ever studied in a group. Go back and say like the people you study with in college are going to be some of your most important colleagues for your whole life. So that's what the PhD program gave me. Is I was hammered so hard that first year that I absolutely needed a study group.
Right.
And study group became my support.
Yeah.
And that just made me want to do that in other aspects of my life.
Right. Yeah. You have to I don't think that's always the message that we get maybe from the world that we live in. It does not necessarily say that people are more important than the projects. I think it's something you have to decide and kind of swim against the tide a little bit to say that. Well, Joe, it is always so wonderful to meet with you and talk with you. And I hope that we get to run into each other again. I always love seeing you every year at the conferences.
Hey, thanks, Scott.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Gonna see us through. Honey, you need me. Baby, I need you.